Hello, and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri.
And Amy Cornell.
And I love the idea for this show, Borrowed Buzz, Amy. We talk about this a lot. In fact, when we were in the green room, I said, this is a show that I think, other than our Amazon topics, this is a show that I think just internally we've had so many conversations about the benefits of anchoring your book to awareness months, holidays, observances, all the things, right?
Yeah, because, it sounds like a bummer, but books really aren't news anymore. You know what I mean? Just releasing a book is not news. So this is such a great way to stay relevant and stay in front of people in multiple different ways, because I know a lot of authors just feel like they're constantly beating their heads against the wall saying, how many different ways can I say buy my book, please, or review my book, please, Yeah. And this kind of gives you an easy in and a more natural in to talk about your book more often without being so pushy about it.
Well, and one of the things when we were kind of brainstorming at the beginning of the month, when we were brainstorming the shows, so we're in Women's History Month. And do we do a show just on Women's History Month? And do we do a show just on Black History Month and on Pride Month? And, and it made more sense just to wrap this into one show, because it is something like if we're doing a show about women's history on top of Women's History Month, it's too late for y'all to really do anything about that. You know what I mean? It's too late really to kind of anchor your book to that topic, which is why we kind of stepped back and we looked and said, there's a lot of opportunity out there for authors to grab. A lot of times when we talk about anchoring your book to a holiday, the first thing that comes up is Christmas, right? Or the first thing that comes up is, I don't know, maybe New Year's or Halloween or something like that. But there are so many opportunities. In fact, Amy, you mentioned in text to me, I think, as we were kind of also brainstorming this show, what did you say? Sleep Awareness Month is this month too?
Yes. Which I was
didn't even know that.
I know. And I'm like, we don't talk about this enough. And so It's true. But it's as soon as I found out that it existed, I'm like, yes, I am all about Sleep Awareness Month. We need to talk about how important sleep is. So believe it or not, a lot of these kind of off the wall observances and things like that may seem silly or insignificant, but you might be surprised how many people, once you bring it to their attention, go, yes, I'm into that. This is something, you know what I mean? I feel strongly about, or I can get behind that. Or even if it just makes them laugh, that's such an amazing emotional touch point that you've made with that potential reader or buyer,
Yeah, exactly. And you're anchoring. And you're also, there's nothing wrong with grabbing, if your book dials into, Pride Month, or it dials into, Breast Cancer Awareness Month or whatever. There's nothing wrong with anchoring your book to that. But the issue is also that everybody else is similar, with similar messages, is doing the same thing. So the idea behind this show is, yes, we're going to, obviously the major holidays are kind of the elephant in the room. So those have to be mentioned. But, these quirky, sometimes, Sleep Awareness Month is not a quirky observance, but sometimes like Peanut Butter and Jelly Day, just as an example, right? Sometimes these fun little quirky observances, industry weeks even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. Those are anchors that you can potentially use to promote your book. As you said, Amy, there are only so many ways to say, buy my book, right?
Exactly. These gives you all sorts of excuses to talk to people.
Well, but the other piece of it, though, too, is that it's much easier to get people interested in something that they're already interested in, right? So if people are thinking about, whatever is coming up, right? So, and we're recording this ahead of tax day, which, of course, everybody hates unless you're getting a refund, right? Then you love it. And then you've probably already filed and maybe even spent your refund. Good for you. But it's also, it's a great, and I find that people don't actually use tax day enough for a whole bunch of different reasons. I mean, and just as an example, right? So that's not necessarily an observance, right? More like a dread for a lot of people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But one of the things that I think is important is that you do have to plan ahead for these. So that's something else that we're going to talk about. And interestingly enough, of course, I've come prepared with my nerd statistics because I love these. According to a consumer trend research, 55 to 65% of shoppers say they are more likely to buy when the messaging feels timely or seasonal. So that's where, anchoring yourself to something that is current, right? And, an observance, whether it's, fun or informative or quirky or whatever it is, can really create a better, a better place for you to promote another opportunity for you to promote your book, and also potentially even create kind of a giftable moment other than the holiday season where we're all trying to get into that giftable moment. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes. And just, the psychology behind, because we talk about it on so many other shows with other strategies, Penny, where we're talking about how you have to make that emotional connection with the reader, right? They need to be invested in you, your work, your brand. I mean, that's how you build readership that comes back. So especially for anybody listening that plans to release multiple books, it's surprisingly effective when you start using these anchors in your content, in your pitching, in how you present yourself to the world, because it makes you more human. There those additional psychological points where people go, oh, that's, you know what I mean? It really is more, it adds more depth to your brand in so many ways. And again, like we've talked about, like 1%, right? So all these little additional anchors that you make improve your brand impression in little ways, but they add up.
They really do. It's very cumulative. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline, because I alluded to this earlier that you've got to start well ahead of time. So obviously for major holidays, Christmas, Mother's Day, things like that. I mean, there's a reason that the term Christmas in July exists, because if you're planning to target the Christmas market, you'd better get skippy in July and start planning that out. And these are just, again, these are general rules of thumb, although the Christmas in July is pretty hard and fast, right? Meaning, so I'm not necessarily suggesting that you start your social media campaign about buying for Christmas in July, right? But you want to start planning, you want to start leaning into that holiday, right? Planning what you're going to be doing, things like that. And the other thing to think about too is that, and, Amy and I have this discussion every year right after Christmas. It bums me out when I walk into a store, right? Like it could be December 26th, right? And all the Valentine's Day stuff is going up. I'm like, people, what is wrong? You know what I mean? And even sometimes it'll sneak in before Christmas is even hit, right? I'm just like, can you just can you just give it a minute? So, but the reason that I mention that is because would take note from retailers, right? So if you are waiting until the awareness day or the holiday or whatever it is hits, so if you're waiting until, Mother's Day to start pitching your Mother's Day topic, even the day before, you are already too late.
Exactly.
So when you think about like when retail starts to push this stuff out to us, that's typically what that should typically align with your timing. So Amy, let's just kind of run through these timing things. So I mentioned, major, obviously the big holidays, Christmas, 6 to 9 months prior, begin your outreach. I mean, I don't know, you're going to have to sort of selectively figure out what you're going to be doing, obviously, because if you're targeting big media, you're going to have to go after that early, which is where the 4 to 6 month prior for targeting comes in. But if you're just planning a social media campaign, and there's nothing wrong with that, just like I'm just doing a social media campaign, then I would say, 8 to 10 weeks prior. I mean, you could even start it right after Halloween, because apparently Thanksgiving doesn't exist anymore. You know what I mean? So as you start to think about those, but I mean, like awareness months, Amy, I mean, when do we start seeing stuff pop up? Usually what? It's 2 months prior, right? At least?
Yeah. I mean, and it also, I think it's worth mentioning that it kind of depends on how you plan on using it, right? Like if you're pitching, if you're pitching yourself for content, you need to give people time because, you never know. The person that you're pitching may not be tracking this holiday or observance necessarily, but you give them a great reason to add content to what they're doing. So you're helping them out by bringing it to their attention and saying, hey, this is what I can do. Let's collaborate. Let's make something of this. And that's fabulous. However, if you want to do, and I'm just doing this as an example, if you want to do a limited time discount on your book, for example, Maple Syrup Saturday is on March 21st. So if there's any romance authors out there with a sexy Canadian in their story, what a fun way.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Are you in marketing or what? I love that. What did you say? Maple Syrup Saturday?
Maple Syrup Saturday. It's always the Saturday of March, and I'm telling you, anybody with a sexy Canadian, this is your chance. Like, we're right on the cusp. So if you're listening to our show in real time, if not, wait for next year. But what a great time to plan a limited time discount and kind of splash that around on your social and your newsletter, things like that. And when you do limited time discounts, Penny, you don't want to tell people 2 months in advance because they will never remember, right?
Oh, 10,000%. Yes, that's absolutely right.
So it really depends on how. So everything that we're telling you, just kind of be strategic about what makes sense based on what you're asking of the recipient, whether that's your audience or the person receiving your pitch or a local news outlet, you know what I mean? And if you're unsure of some dates like that, shameless plug here, you could always do some coaching with Penny. Like, if you really want to get into this and plan out, especially if you're a nonfiction author, a lot of times you need longer lead times just based on what you're typically going after, like, set out some times, plan it out, and get really smart about when you really need to start this work. Like Penny said, like, if you're already waiting for all the holiday stuff to show up in the store and you're trying to get into a magazine, you're too late. But if you're doing fun observances like this in a limited time discount promotion, you can do those leading up to the holiday, a few days in advance, a week in advance, remind people once or twice. So just be smart about your timing.
But like for podcasts, and local media, I would say 8 to 12 weeks in advance. You know what I mean? And podcasts, since that usually, some podcasts I realize more newsy, like the true crime market, those tend to record and release immediately, but a lot of the podcasts don't. So they'll plan ahead. But I would say 8 to 12 weeks in advance for podcasts. And, actually, I'll tell you, even if you're planning your social media content, 8 to 12 weeks in advance to plan that out so that you're prepared, so you're not doing it the week before is not a bad idea. So I think, and then I think that the other piece of it is like what makes a good anchor, right? So relevance. And Amy's like Maple Syrup Saturday, that's kind of a mouthful. But I love it. Maple Syrup Saturday. I would really, I think you have to just get really creative with these. Right? You have to get really creative with these. You may hear Maple Syrup Saturday and think this has nothing to do with my book, but you have a sexy Canadian and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, Amy is brilliant. And first off, yes, you're right. But you have to, so when you think about relevance, you don't want to go too far off the mark, right? But at the same time, these cute little tie-ins are just, they're brilliant, and the more unique that you can create, your tie-in, the more attention that you're going to get, because people will like the Maple Syrup Saturday. Again, such a mouthful. That example is so cute and so unique that it would stop me in my tracks on Instagram, for example, right?
Right.
Because I would think, and honestly, that's actually, that's share-worthy. That's a share-worthy thing. So yes, relevance is important, but you also, step outside your comfort zone a little bit too, right? Because I think that you want to just spend some time and get really creative. And I know that sometimes we get some feedback for mentioning AI, but this is a really good example of how you can use ChatGPT to help you kind of brainstorm. Like pop in a bunch of observances or something and your brand and ask it for ideas, and not everything, because sometimes Amy and I have had conversations about this. I'm just like, chat just sounds like it's drunk, but sometimes, at the very least, it's a sounding board that can help you to kind of brainstorm. Don't take everything at face value that it sends, because as we said, not all of it is really accurate and sometimes it's drawn. But it's a great opportunity because sometimes getting creative with these observances and things like that gets to be a little bit iffy, I think.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, just to, for anybody that's like, oh, I don't want to use, AI for anything related to my book, this is not that. You know what I mean?
True.
All of this information exists. It's just all over the internet. So using AI is a great way to say, like, if you give it a handful of themes, topics, concepts in your book, and just say, give me a list of holidays, observances, things like that align with these, themes. It's just basically crowdsourcing information for you. You know what I mean?
For sure.
This is not one of those situations where AI is writing your book or AI is doing all your branding.
I'm designing your cover or something. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's literally just saving you some time and giving you things to consider to then whittle that down into things that you actually resonate with and that work for you. Like Penny said, you want to always check their work. But again, it's a huge time saver versus spending a bunch of time searching the internet for all these random lists of different observances and things like that, and then trying to compile what you like, what you don't like. AI is a great way to save yourself some time.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of which, Amy, do you want to, so I know we have some lesser known observances, which are kind of fun. Since you already took the lead on Maple Syrup Saturday. Sorry, I need to keep saying that because it's just the coolest thing on the planet. Do you want to run through some of these? Because some of these are really, really, really cool for fiction, nonfiction, business leadership, all the things.
Yes. So some of the fiction ones that are really, and these are great because they're pretty relevant. Like some of these are great for anybody. National Tell a Story Day.
Yes.
Like that is you could do so many different things with that. Like that's a great time to do a special release, something like behind the scenes content. This is also, again, if you are a seasoned author, and especially if you already have your brand and platform set up to help other authors, that's a great opportunity to pitch yourself to do some educational type content for other people. Again, like Penny already said, think outside the box a little bit. Just think about how different people think about this potential holiday and think about, all right, what's my best option here? But
and you have time for that because it's not until April 27th. So awesome.
Yes, National Tell a Story Day, April 27th. I know, I love that.
Yeah.
And oh my God, there's just so many.
I know, we don't have to call all of them out. Certainly we can put them in the show notes, but pick and choose. I just have to go with, I really love National Paranormal Day. I think that's sorry.
So
I love me some UFO stories. Thanks. I love that.
I know. Yes.
And that's on May 3rd. What?
Yep. Oh, and I was going to say National Sisters Day. I am actually an only child, but I have
As am I, yeah.
I know, but my children are sisters. But again, just for more examples outside the box, these are obviously great for family sagas, anything with sisters in it. But then there's also this kind of additional tie-in with the gift element, right, Penny? So this isn't just, this is a great book if you have a sister, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. It still gives you a reason to talk about your book. But then another layer of that, what a great gift to send your sister. You know what I mean? Or what a great gift to give a friend who is close with her sisters. You know what I mean? Like, again, just think of these as multi-layered opportunities potentially.
Right, exactly. And there's one, so I mentioned tax time. April is Stress Awareness Month, which is actually a really, you could make that actually kind of a really fun tie-in. Right. Right. Obviously, Financial Literacy Month in April is kind of a gimme. Like, okay, we get it. It ties into, right. National Clean Out Your Garage Day for home organization books. I didn't even know that existed.
I know. Isn't that funny?
Right. But I don't know. There's no particular date on this. So you may have to, if this, kind of piques your interest, you may have to. But what do you think about National Creativity Day? I love that, especially because we're all creatives.
I know, exactly. And honestly, Penny, I think your National Clean Out Your Garage Day, I think that could be really cool for anybody that's written a book about like mental clarity, getting your life in order, reducing
for sure.
Like there's so many reasons why getting that, that awful garage project done that you could angle that in so many different ways to, for quite a few different topics actually, and just use that as how great would that feel once that's done? You know what I mean? And I talk about these kind of things in my work, X, Y, and Z, and then you kind of lead into what you specialize. But it's amazing what you can do with these days that seem like super random, but when presented properly, you not only are being creative and being unique in the space, you are giving, especially if you're pitching yourself, you are giving the recipient something interesting and new and different that they probably weren't considering in the first place too. And that is gold.
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely gold. So in terms of how to get this, so how to work with a strategy like this, all right. So obviously Amy mentioned, the content alignment with your social media. So that's kind of a given, right? But you may also decide to do like a newsletter theme, which would be fun if you have an active if you have a newsletter. Um, and it kind of also goes without saying that if you're doing any kind of pitching, whether it's influencer pitching or whatever podcast, whatever it is that you're doing, obviously the subject lines reference the observance in some creative way, which again, if you haven't had any luck with pitching and this is piqued your interest, that's another opportunity to get out there, anchoring to some kind of an observance. Amy, I'm also a huge fan of really aligning and I guess this kind of depends. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So aligning your Amazon stuff, right, under this umbrella of stuff is, like your ads, your keywords and things like that. I mean, I think if you're going after peanut butter and jelly day, or you're going after maple syrup Saturday or whatever, it's kind of like, it's a lot of work to do it just for one day.
Right.
But I think,
you're reading my mind. I had peanut butter and jelly day in my mind too. And I'm thinking, do not change your keywords to National Peanut Butter and Jelly Day.
Well, that's right. That's the thing though, too, is that you do have to be careful with that because people aren't necessarily searching on observances or, you know what I mean? And they're not searching for books on, Women's History Month or something. Like there may be searching on women's history, but not necessarily Women's History Month. So you want to don't get too dicey with your keywords, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
No, you're totally right. But that does make sense. I will say keywords are also something too that they don't instantly necessarily, you know what I mean? These are algorithm changes too. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Not everything is just instant on Amazon when you make updates. So again, like you said, Penny, for the bigger holidays that you are planning months in advance for, especially if they are tied directly into retail shopping behavior that's already established, that's when it makes a lot more sense. Author Central, though, all of that content is a lot easier to update and it pretty much starts taking hold. Granted, you still trigger the algorithm, but you can get those updated pretty quickly too. So that's a fun way to kind of, if you're prepping for something maybe a month or a few weeks in advance, you can update pieces of that content to align with what you are trying to connect to versus, from the author section would be a great place to put your message to potential buyers and connect to a specific holiday coming up and why it works. That's a really strategic, clever way to do that. In fact, we worked with an author. This is not the first time we've worked with her. I love her stuff. And she did a book. I'm just going to say it, Lana Bailey. I don't know if she's a listener or not, but she did this. She does books about fabulous women. And she did a book about the Wicked Witch, but literally from, cinema history and how just the whole idea of the Wicked Witch and how it's been in society. It's fabulous. But she was also releasing her book ahead of when the second Wicked movie was coming out.
Oh, I loved that.
I know. Yes. So when we helped her with her retail stuff, we actually gave her a version that she could use that was more evergreen, that she could use long term. But we gave her all sorts of different content for her retail page that was specifically tied into that major release happening and that huge cultural phenomenon that was the Wicked movie. You know what I mean? To pull those buyers and those because Amazon was selling all sorts of stuff around that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
For sure.
she had a huge opportunity to pull in additional people that may not be looking for her book, but because they love the movie would go, oh my gosh, look at this fabulous book about, you know what I mean? Anyway, but so that's the kind of stuff that you really want to think long term about. Like you can have different versions of your retail page content that are appropriate and have them ready for these bigger observances or these bigger cultural movements that you actually have some lead up time into where it really makes sense to make those kind of changes.
And, I also like the idea of doing themed A+ content,
Yes.
modules. Again, for a singular day, it doesn't really make so much sense unless obviously it's a big holiday like Christmas or New Year's or something like that. Like I get that alignment, but I love the tie-in with the Wicked. The other piece of it though too is that when you are tying into something pop culture, something, like a big movie release or whatever that is, those tend to have longer tails, right? Those, because like the Wicked buildup was for so long ahead of, you know what I mean? And obviously we just got done with the Olympics. So if your book had tied into the Olympics, you could have spent, you could have used the ramp up of the Olympics and then, basically the entire event and that's where changed A+ content would totally make sense because you have a little bit more longevity to it.
Exactly.
So I think that, so my recommendation, if this has just like sparked something in you and you think I really want to do this, try to identify 3 to 5 anchor moments in a year. And like I said, there used to be able to search Google for creative holidays. And now I think a lot of these places charge for that stuff, which I totally understand because it's a lot of work to put these, they're like literally books of all of this information together. But you can do some searches through, Google and through maybe AI and stuff, and just kind of find some anchor moments that you can use throughout the year. And try to get at least 3 of them. If you can get more, I think that's great. And just plug those into your planning schedule and then start to work backwards. So
yes,
start to figure out, okay, so for example, if you're doing, we get this question a lot. If you think, you know what, I really want my book to be in a gift guide, for example. And when I say gift guide, everybody always thinks about gift guides for Christmas, right? And I get that, super popular, also highly competitive, right? If you're thinking about, okay, not only do I want to pitch my book around XYZ month, but I also want to be in a gift guide, you'd better start that 6 months or more ahead of time, because I'm pretty sure, unless that has changed, that, gift guides for December, for example, at the latest, they're finalized in August, and that's actually pretty late. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to do gift guides for any, whatever it's Mother's Day or whatever it is, Easter, because magazines still do quite a few gift guides, both in print and online. So that's something to consider. But I think that you just have to kind of back into, you have to plan backwards, right? You have to figure out what you're going to do and then how much time that you need to prepare for that, and how much, what does your window look like to get out ahead of it? Because the other piece of it too is that if you're going to do social media, right, you're going to have to create posts. Do that early. Don't wait for posts until you because I don't know about you, but I just don't have that kind of time and the more rushed I feel, frankly, the less creative I am. I don't know. You know what I mean? So bank that content, get it done, and just start the planning. And I'm telling you, the great thing about this is that you can just, if you're planning out far enough in advance, you don't feel like you're not looking at your marketing thinking, oh, what am I going to do next? Because you have all these fun little anchor moments throughout the year, to market to. Amy, what do you want to talk about? Some of the most common mistakes. I love these, actually.
I know.
I especially love the second one, but go for it, because I have very strong feelings about all the things.
So obviously waiting too long, and I would say as a general rule, not being strategic about the timing in general. So obviously waiting too long is a problem, but we already talked about the fact that, based on what you're looking to accomplish, figure out your timing based on that. People aren't going to remember a limited time discount for 2 months, but you're also not going to get, a guest article in a magazine the month before you want it to run either.
Right. Exactly.
So be smart about timing and just, use common sense. I think y'all have been listening long enough. You've got this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to do the second one? You said you felt strongly.
I'm sorry. I just feel really strongly. So don't force irrelevant tie-ins, right? I mean, just stop. I'm sorry. I don't know how, I mean, so I've had authors over the years who want to anchor their book to something that is that, and they'll ask me, they say, well, do you think that I should, and it's basically wildly inappropriate. And it's not inappropriate like in a rude way, but it's inappropriate like, I didn't even get this. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah.
Just because you liked the maple syrup Saturday doesn't mean that you should use it. I'm just saying. I've repeated maple syrup Saturday now 45 times on this podcast. People are, nobody's turning this off.
But it's so true, Penny. Like just because something occurs, just because it occurs once or twice in your book does not mean that that is a strong enough, through anchor in your book to turn it into an observance.
Thank you. Exactly.
Yes. And it's kind of like for nonfiction, like some of the ideas may sound great, but that if that's not really what your background is in, I'm going to be totally honest. Like if somebody goes and looks through your platform, looks through your website, looks through your book, and you have no background in what you're trying to pitch yourself for, but you like the idea because it's an upcoming observance that seems like it may reach your people. I appreciate that you want to make things work, but you could end up spending a lot of time and effort for very little response because they're not going to get it. You know what I mean? And you typically don't have enough time to explain that. If it's not an obvious match in the first couple seconds that somebody registers what you're giving them, it's not working.
Well, but the other piece of it though too, and we've had this happen where an author will say, let's say they wrote a romance novel or something, and they say, well, this is an obvious buy for Mother's Day. Well, but is it? You know what I mean? Because not all, like, Amy, if I bought you a romance novel, with all due respect to romance writers everywhere, if I bought you a romance novel for Mother's Day, I don't, you know what I mean? Like that's not a brand match with what Amy reads.
Right.
So don't necessarily assume, and I've had authors ask me this before because Mother's Day, for many is kind of an obvious, like, oh my God, that's what I'm going to anchor my book to. It's not an obvious tie-in. Don't make assumptions. Now, if your book has strong mother themes, right? Great, but don't overreach some of these observances. So just make sure that there's some kind of natural, relevant, tie-in that people can actually.
Or be smarter about it and say, if your mom likes. I mean, you can get a little more wiggle room out of that as long as you're very clear about who your market is. Then you can kind of inch into that, but you have to be smart about it. But I agree with you. Like, don't just say, just because people buy gifts for Mother's Day and you happen to have a book, like, it's a perfect Mother's Day gift. It's like, that's not how it works.
Right, exactly. So, okay, do you want to take the next one? Because now I've just gone on and on and on about forcing irrelevant tie-ins to the point that people have turned.
That's hilarious. I mean, you already covered this one, not preparing things in advance, but I can't emphasize that enough because we hear from clients and authors all the time how much work marketing can be. And truly, this kind of creative stuff, you're going to be better at it. And it's going to be a lot more enjoyable if you do things in advance. Because then once, like Penny said, once the time comes, you're just posting or you're double checking and everything's already taken care of. And I thought it was very honest. Like to your point, like it's really hard to be creative under duress. So really start thinking about these things in advance because you might think about it first and have an idea. And a couple of days later, you might go, I got it. I know what I'm going to do. And that's what setting this stuff up in advance really helps you achieve,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, and again, to me, this really makes your marketing fun, right?
Yes.
Because you're not just like, oh, here's my book and here's my book and here's my book. You're anchoring to something, and even things that people, like we talked about Sleep Awareness Month or week or whatever that was. I didn't even know that existed. It's a really great opportunity. There's so much opportunity out there to really grab on to some of these observances and holidays and things like that. So, and again, just in closing, I love it when you put yourself in a position where you're not competing, where you're aligning with attention rather than competing for attention, right? Because we always feel, as authors, we always feel like we are just competing for attention and trying to get attention on the shelf space and all this other stuff. Align yourself with something that's already going on. And it's going to feel so much easier. And I cannot tell you over the years how many authors that we have seen get successfully placed or featured or interviewed or whatever using these kinds of alignments. So this is an insider trick that I don't know that a lot of people are necessarily talking about, but it's definitely worked for us, and it's definitely worked for our authors. And it's worked for authors that I've talked to in Met events and things like that, where they think, anchoring is just amazing. So.
Oh, I agree.
Amy, did I miss anything? Sorry.
No, I think this was a really exciting episode because it's easy to get kind of run down with what do I do next? And this is a great way to distract yourself in a productive way, right? Give yourself something else to focus on versus spinning your wheels with all the usual things you've been doing. You owe yourself a break, a creative break. Have fun with this. And if you come up with a fun idea, please let us know.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
We love hearing about your wins, and we love hearing about your creative ideas. It makes my day.
And I think that at some point as authors, like we oftentimes as you said, we get kind of a little bit road weary because like, oh, we've tried all the things. The more that you can give yourself to focus on, the more new creative that you can give yourself to focus on, the more energy that you continue to infuse in your own marketing as you're going out there and you're knocking on doors and trying to get people's attention. So I hope that this show has been helpful. I want to remind everybody, I usually do this at the start of the show, but I didn't. Text the word podcast to 888-402-8940. And we get lots of questions. We didn't have time for a question today because I think we ran a little bit long, but we love questions, show ideas, all the things. We have a bunch of people that send us messages and things like that all the time, and we love hearing from you. So once again, that's text the word podcast to 888-402-8940. And please leave us a review wherever you listen to the show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.